We live in a country where politicians are more afraid of voters than voters are of politicians. That's how we want it. That feels filthier. That feels like a grosser part of rock and roll, but not what I think. And you know that.
Over to you, Chris.
Like, I don't know.
What if he's still around?
Cool story, comma, bro.
Chris, I have so much to talk to you about today, including the upcoming election, and I'm not talking about the 2026 midterms or even the 2028 presidential election. I'm talking about 2032. But we're going to get to that in a minute because I want to ask you about Don Lemon. Don Lemon is a former CNN anchor. There was news that broke just this hour where he's been arrested by the Trump administration. And of course, the reason for his arrest is because he participated, or he was present, let's put it that way, at a protest inside a Minneapolis church recently, where demonstrators were protesting the presence of ICE agents in their city. And so there was a protest in a church. Don Lemon ended up there. And some folks were arrested, have been arrested, 3 or 4 people since that protest occurred. And now today we've learned that last night they arrested Don Lemon. Now, I question to you, Chris, and we can get into the legalities of what, the legal merits or demerits of whether this is a good legal case. But politically, is this, my first take is, does this make Don Lemon a martyr and play right into his hands, or does it give Trump a very good piece of red meat to rally the base about, go after the Don Lemon, the former CNN anchor who has obviously been a big critic of Trump?
Well, both things are true. First of all, let us just say the Bondi Justice Department, again, laser focused on the top priorities of an anxious nation, which is apprehending former cable news hosts. This is where the American people are right now. It works for both of them. The charges that they brought against Don Lemon have already been rejected by both a magistrate court and an appellate court. So the Justice Department wanted to arrest Don Lemon. Magistrate said, "You got it." And so they appealed the magistrate's decision and took it to an appellate court that said, again, no. And then they said, okay, we're arresting him anyway. And this will, do you recall the many imbroglios of Don Lemon's former CNN personality, Jim Acosta, in the first Trump term?
Sure.
Worked for Jim Acosta, worked for Donald Trump, right? Elevated the position of Jim Acosta, gave Trump a foil so that he could say, look at how I'm punching these dirty media people in the face, and to say, this is what the whole press is like, right? So there's a bunch of nerds sitting around in the press briefing like, well, I wanted to ask you a question about the and then you've got Jim Acosta in the front row like, are you ready to admit that you're a fascist? And
there's some utility in it for the president, and there's certainly some utility in it for Don Lemon, as you're saying, and the left.
Right. But the problem for this administration, and I think it speaks to the overall difficulty that the president and his team are in right now, they got too much going on in too many places all at once, right? The problem with flood the zone. So flood the zone, the idea that you just overwhelm your critics. There's just too much for people to deal with, and they sort of shut down. This is a Bannonite idea. As a media strategy, yes, right? As a media strategy, it works, which is the press can't focus on one thing. We could go back over the past year and we could think of 10 stories that you could make a whole year. You would have, when you were a White House correspondent, you could have made a whole year's worth of coverage out of this one thing. But right as it's like, okay, well, here we are, we've got him. It's like, well, what about this? You haven't even talked about this. We're seizing the president of Venezuela. Okay, throw that out. I would forget about that. Now we got to talk about this next thing. Okay, well, what about Greenland? What about?
Yeah.
That as a communication strategy is effective. As a governing strategy, it is buns, right? It doesn't work because you have too many things going on all at once. As you have, I assume, the FBI taking Don Lemon into custody in Los Angeles. You have your Directorate of National Intelligence taking the FBI to a Fulton County, Georgia elections office to seize ballots, while you have negotiations going on in Washington. Maybe I can shut up by saying, in a ordered administration, the Minneapolis surge would not have taken place until the funding deal was done, right? In an ordered administration, you would say, I hear you. This is a priority for me too, but let's get the shutdown threat off the table so that we don't have to talk about that this election year, and we won't have another shutdown this election year. And then you can go bananas in Minneapolis. Greg Bovino can go hog wild in Minneapolis, and there won't be anything the Democrats can do about it. But they got it out of order. So now the president has to make concessions in order to avoid the shutdown. And it just speaks to the Don Lemon speaks to the larger problem, structural problem of this administration, which is they let so many rabbits loose that they can't put them back in the pen.
Yeah. So we've covered now the politics of the Don Lemon arrest, but let's talk about the law for a minute, because I find it sort of ironic that the law that the administration has used to make the arrests in connection with this church disruption, and correct me if I'm wrong, if my memory serves, it was a law that was originally designed to go after pro-life demonstrators who were protesting in front of abortion clinics. And during the negotiations to get this thing passed, the only way to get it passed, conservatives insisted on additions to the law that would also make it apply to church services, disrupting church services. No one ever really thought that was going to be a big thing. But here, now that law, you have basically leftists, demonstrating in a church, and they're being arrested under the law that they pushed forth to go after pro-life demonstrators.
I don't know about legal tests for the law in the past. I know that the idea of the Supreme Court saying, yeah, I think we need to curtail the First Amendment here in these circumstances, make these disruptions separate from there are public laws that relate to trespassing and public laws that relate to other things. There are the habit of the court, and this isn't just the Roberts Court, but of the Supreme Court over time, is that when First Amendment questions are presented, they want to find the solution with the least restriction on the constitutional rights of Americans, right? So they look for, okay, where's the off-ramp here that we can take before we limit the First Amendment? And look, I don't know whether the administration, I don't know whether the president, well, how about this? We know now that the Justice Department, including on things like fraud, has people in the White House working with the president, right? So the idea of Justice Department independence was always a little fictive, more fictive than others, more fictive sometimes than other times. But the idea of that the Justice Department is acting independently was good for the Justice Department, but it was also good for the president, right? It was good for the president to be able to say, well, don't look at me.
Gave him some remove, which came in handy sometimes. To
all
say,
I said was,
that's not my thing. They're doing their own thing. Don't ask me.
All I said was, who will rid me of this pestilent YouTuber? And these overzealous knights ran off to Canterbury and beheaded him. Yeah. The idea of that wall was good for the Justice Department and good politically for the president. Trump has torn down the wall. He now has the Justice Department has tasked somebody, I understand, to the White House so that Trump can direct himself the investigation into welfare fraud, like Minnesota style. Once you have the idea that the president can direct people to arrest his critics, once you say like, well, there isn't a procedure here. The president says things and then the Justice Department does them. It is, of course, bad for the Justice Department. It's bad for keeping staff at the Justice Department. It's also bad, as the Trump administration has learned by crossing the Second Amendment people, that even conservatives like the Bill of Rights, maybe especially conservatives like the Bill of Rights. So if you go tromping into these places, into the Fourth Amendment, into the Second Amendment, into the First Amendment, and go off, and the president's doing it, he doesn't have anybody to blame. He can't say, "Oh, I am shocked," as he did with the Epstein files. I don't know anything about that. So you don't get to pick and choose. Yeah. If you're the president, you don't get to say, "I'm telling the Justice Department what to do when it comes to investigating voter fraud or in arresting Don Lemon. But when it comes to these Epstein files, I got nothing to do with it. I don't know a thing about it." So I think this is it's too much, and he's put himself in trouble.
Chris, you and I have long joked about how it's never too early to talk about the next presidential election. And of course, we were referring to 2028. But today, in your Whole Hog column, you wrote a little bit about the 2032 picture. And specifically, you wrote about something that happened this week coming out of the Census Department that might shed some light on whether Republicans could have a bit of an advantage in 2032. Can you explain what happened this week that makes you think that?
You know, I'm always underestimating you. One of the things about you that is dangerous is that you're just this, aw shucks guy from Cleveland, St. Ignatius High, like, oh, whatever, just be bopping along, listening to some prog rock and being chill about it. And while I'm going through like, so halfway through the decade, the Census Bureau dumps its how it's going so far. So the Census Bureau is always doing estimates, always estimating. Yep. And then in the fifth
year, not
just
every 10 years, they actually 10 years, they actually count. They actually go out and put out surveys and physically count the population of the United States. But in the other years, they do a sort of estimate, they extrapolate. And then I believe in the middle of the decade, they do a mid-decade sort of pretty hefty estimate of where we're headed for 2030.
The census is the final it's sort of like the difference between an exit poll and a regular poll. The census is a real good survey. It's the best.
It's the NORC.
It's the it's the best survey because they do try to count everybody, but then they do some estimating, right? They have to say, well, we couldn't get the people up that holler. They shot at us twice and they didn't want to talk. So we're going to estimate how many chimneys we see up there. There is estimation in the final census. But mid-decade, they release so this year, they give us the 2025 estimate, and it comes with 2024, 2023, 2022, and 2021. So we get it all for the first half, and then we can start diving in and looking for trends. So I'm looking at this stuff, and I'm thinking about this stuff because I'm a huge nerd, and lo and behold, Bill Sammon hits me in the text with like, "Oh, did you see this about the Republican seat shift?" And I'm like, "This is my thing. How is this your thing?" But then I remember in the decade now a lot more than a decade that I've done decision desking work with you. You're a stealth nerd. You're a huge nerd.
I covered the Census Bureau for the Cleveland Plain Dealer decades ago, and I too nerded out on. I would do just deep dives on not just population shifts, but income and racial breakdowns. And I love all of that stuff. And especially this tranche that came out this week, because there's a real political significance. And basically it boils down to this. population, obviously, people keep moving from one state to another. That's been going on from the beginning. But it looks like the trend away from blue states like California and New York, people moving out and moving into what happen to be politically red states like Florida and Texas, is continuing to the point where we may be looking at roughly a dozen electoral votes moving from blue states. And there's a map on our full screen from one of these projections, moving from blue states to red states, which means that in a presidential election, when a Republican candidate wins a red state like Texas or Florida, and because almost all of our states go by the winner-take-all rule, which is to say, if you get a majority of votes in Texas, or you get a majority of the votes, 50.1% of the votes in Florida, you get 100% of the electoral votes. That's how our system works mostly. So if all of a sudden the Republicans who normally take Texas or Florida or what have you are now getting more electoral votes when they win those, and Democrats who normally take places like California, Illinois, New York, and so forth are still winning those, but those have fewer electoral votes, that could give an edge to Republicans in what has been a series of very tight presidential elections in recent history. Is that sort of the long and short of it?
So the map shows the more aggressive projection, which is 13. Republican, the Republican nerds say it's more like 11. And I think it's also significant. We have to think about so the big changes, the long-term arc is what? Illinois, New York, California, the big pieces of the blue wall are shedding population, and the big pieces of the red wall, Texas and Florida, are gaining population. But it is also important, I would say, to look at the other states. What else is on the list? So it's yes, California, New York, Illinois, but then also Oregon, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Rhode Island all losing probably one,
yeah.
And
Each.
And then the gains coming to Florida and Texas, but also Georgia, North Carolina, Arizona, Utah, and Idaho. And I would caution Republicans. Yes, Idaho is going to be very, very, very Republican. And so is Utah. Now, Utah is a little dangerous for Republicans because of the Church of Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints. They get a little Romneysian, right? They will occasionally blanch at some of the excesses of sort of nationalist republicanism. They're very nice in Utah.
Yes.
But those two for
polite.
sure. Those two for sure. Georgia, North Carolina, and Arizona. I don't know, guys. That
was going to be the second part of my question, which is to say, at first blush, when you say, okay, well, maybe a dozen electoral votes go out of blue states and go into red states, how could that not be good for Republicans? And I think generally this is going to be good for Republicans no matter what. But on second blush, you have to say, it's not axiomatic that everyone that moves into Georgia is a Republican, or everyone that moves into Texas or Florida or any of these states is a Republican. In other words, people are leaving blue states. Presumably, a lot of those people are liberals, and they're going. They got to end up somewhere. Some of these states might go a little purple, right?
But see, this is now you've stumbled into my bugaboo, and so I used to think the way you think, but then
then you became enlightened.
But then I became enlightened. No, there is truth in what you say, right? That you're changing all those Californians going to Texas are changing Texas. All the New Yorkers going to Florida are changing Florida. But here's two things to please remember. Number one, it is mostly a self-selecting group of people. And if you are a Californian who says Texas sounds good, you're probably not a La Raza member who is excited to vote for Katie Porter. You are probably you're at least open to the idea of being another way. So I think what Texas and Georgia are the good examples. Florida remains a very close state. Republicans take Florida for granted, and Florida has gotten more Republican. But boy, a little breeze could tip. Florida is not Texas. Texas is politically inelastic at about a 5-point advantage for Republicans. Florida is politically inelastic at about a 1-point advantage for Republicans.
Yeah.
So they got a lot less cushion, and if things went sideways down there, Republicans could certainly lose. Florida is not like New York and California are for Democrats, which the margins are so big that even in a bad year, even like 2024, they don't have to ever think about it. In Florida, Republicans will continue to have to think about it, especially if they keep deporting Cubans and making Cubans angry. They will definitely have to think about it. But take Texas and Georgia, which are Republican states. Texas is inelastic, 5 points. Georgia is very elastic, right? This is a state that Joe Biden won in 2020. This is a state that Bill Clinton won. Georgia has a big Black population and is dominated by a metro center, right? Unlike Texas, which is like 5 states, Georgia works like a lot of other states that are blue states, which is one big metro area counterbalanced by a big rural swath.
Right.
And what you say is true, that the people who move to Atlanta for a job or move to Dallas for a job, they're not all Republicans. It's true. But then I saw something in the Ted Cruz Beto O'Rourke race that started to change my thinking on that theory, which is that in a survey done after the election, native-born Texans preferred Beto O'Rourke, and people who had moved to Texas preferred Ted Cruz.
That's interesting.
And I said, "What? How could it be? Isn't everybody from Texas Yosemite Sam with 6 guns in their belts? Like what do you mean?" And so then you dig deeper. And what I point to in the note today is the consequences. This is I doubt that we get to talk much Austrian economics on this webcast frequently, but there's a Schumpeterian idea here about the rise of the managerial class. So as your state gets richer, as your state becomes more successful, it changes who the people there are. And so I looked at college going rates in Texas and Georgia compared to their counterparts in the North, Ohio and Michigan.
Yeah.
College, the percent of the adult population in all of those states that had over 25 that have at least a bachelor's degree has gone up in all of the states. But now Texas and Georgia have a larger larger percentage of their adult populations are college graduates than Ohio.
That is astonishing, and that is so significant. And you did write about that. And it is a manifestation of the population shift that we don't often talk about. We talk about, well, that means there'll be more Republicans, or that means there'll be fewer Democrats, or whatever. But people move for a reason, and people who have the means to move and who have the freedom to move tend to be better educated, or at least move to another state or another part of the country.
Right.
And so they bring the better, so that changes the educational
and the people
complexion of different states.
How many people in Texas and how many people in Georgia would say, I am a first generation college student. I'm a 10th generation Georgian. I'm a 7th generation Texan, but I'm a first or second generation college graduate. When you look at what has happened with incomes and educational attainment in these states, and it's the frustration for Republicans is the success of lower taxes, lower regulatory burden, right to work laws, the things that Southern states embraced out of necessity, right? When they were way behind the rest, right? As the South was trailing the rest of the nation and trying to figure out in a post-Jim Crow world, how does the South recover and how does the South catch up? And we can think back to Ted Turner and the heroes of the New South, as it was talked about, Bill Clinton as their most notable entity. How do we catch up? They did, right? They've done it, but there are consequences for them in their populations, which are that the populations of Georgia and Texas, to just use those as the clearest examples, are getting younger in median age. They are getting less uniformly white, not just because of immigration from Latin America, but because of intermarriage and all of the long-term societal trends. And it's getting better educated and wealthier. Those are electorates that Republicans have spurned, right? The Republican Party says we want to be the party of the working class. And that will continue to help them in places like Ohio, maybe one day even in Minnesota, certainly in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. We could look at the flip side of this map, and we could see an America in 2032 or in 2036 where the South is increasingly Democratic and the North, the Rust Belt and the Northeast.
Wow.
Will New Jersey one day be a Republican state? That's not crazy. Just to sum up, let me just say, when I started, the first presidential campaign that I covered in any real sense was the 2004, which is now a stunning 22 years ago. But the first one of those that I covered, what were the swing states? Ohio and Florida.
Ohio, my home state.
Ohio and Florida. It all comes down to Ohio and Florida. It's all about the I-4 corridor. It's all about Orlando and Orange County. It's all about the Columbus suburbs, blah, 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 blah. And we knew it, and it was firm. And now they don't campaign in Ohio. No, they don't campaign in Florida.
Well, it's like Pennsylvania. I mean, I was always shocked that Trump was able to carry Pennsylvania. I thought that was sort of a lost cause in recent history. Chris, by the way, I just want to remind our audience that we're going to be taking your live questions shortly. We got some great ones coming over the transom. I think we're going to start with Scott Collins, who has a great question about some of our American institutions and confidence in those institutions. But I'll let Scott put it in his own words. But first, I want to just get you on one more topic, Chris, and that is, I want to ask you about the media. Because this week, we've seen a lot of coverage of a couple of legacy media outlets, the Washington Post and CBS News. And basically, if I could simplify the takeaway, the commonality here is that these are, old line legacy media, sort of left of center, mainstream media sensibilities. They were purchased by rich people who wanted to move the editorial sensibilities back to the center, I guess would be the charitable way to put it. And a lot of the journalists in those news organizations are squawking and saying, you're destroying it. And there's also questions about these journalistic models as business models. Now, you wrote a wonderful book about the media called Broken News.
Yes.
And I read every word of that thing, and it was really
good. You blurbed it. And it would have been bad.
There it is on the screen. Look at that. Look at that cover. And I just was wondering, what is your take? Because, you said something intriguing a few weeks ago, Chris, that you just said it as an aside, but it intrigued me. You said, do we even have a media? Is there really a media per se anymore? And I wondered what you meant by that. And I wonder what you mean, what you make of these latest two controversies.
Well, whatever anybody thinks of Barry Weiss and whatever anybody thinks about the arrangement that it's the Ellisons, right?
Yes.
That the Ellison, whatever you think of the arrangements that the Ellison family made with the Trump family in order to obtain legislative permit or regulatory permissions and encouragements to expand their media empire. Lay all that aside and focus on one true thing that Barry Weiss definitely said, whatever you think, which is, it's over, folks. The story of the Japanese soldiers who did not know that the war was over, right? I think there are people inside these organizations who believe that they are still gatekeeping and that they are there doing this valuable and important legacy work. And I don't think many people care, right? I am sure that the marketplace is so competitive and so fractured that the idea that CBS News is in some, I kept hearing people talk about the 60 Minutes this and 60 Minutes that. I don't want to be crummy, but I will just say that I can't remember certainly I can't remember the last time I watched a whole episode of 60 Minutes.
Yeah, no, me neither.
And maybe let me just sum it up by saying
it gets great ratings, but it's sort of a dying, it's just they're into the land of diminishing returns with each passing year.
And when they get their best ratings is when it's on after football. But the idea of these people as gatekeepers, as these people who are in control, that they have this special responsibility, we're on our own. Nobody is coming. The work that I do, the work that you do, the work that The Hill does, the work that people can see on The Hill Sunday, tune in 10 a.m. Eastern. The work that your great team of reporters at The Hill does, all has to stand on its own merits. And it all has to stand on its merits in a factious, fractured, weird, wild media landscape. I think the insane mismanagement of the Washington Post, and not just, I will point out, not just under Jeff Bezos. Everybody's like, oh, Jeff Bezos. The Washington Post has been a wreck for a long time. And the decision now, it is beyond parody, if I can just say, as a person who, for a brief period of time, for 3 years, worked in a paper that aimed to be a competitor to the Washington Post. We were both at the Washington Examiner. The idea that the proposed reboot for the Washington Post is to cut back on local coverage, I thought, who would notice? Who would notice a Washington Post that, and I'm being unfair, there are a lot of local reporters who do a lot of great work for the Washington Post, but the paper was so disdainful already of covering the city in which it was located. And if Jeff Bezos had said to me, I want you to take over the Washington Post and fix it, I would say, we're going to get weirdly local, right? We are going to cover Washington, D.C. It's a medium-sized city that has more reporters in it per human being than any other city in the country, and it gets crummy local coverage.
Yeah.
And the Washington Post is unworthy of the city and its population because they just think they for years have been fixated on the New York Times and wanting to compete with the New York Times instead of ever saying, well, our real peers are the Miami Herald and the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, like the Philadelphia Inquirer. Those should be the Washington Post's real competitors. But I don't suppose Jeff Bezos bought the Washington Post to keep up to date with Reston, Virginia high school athletics. So it's turning.
That's not the vanity play. That's not the vanity buy when a billionaire buys a.
You got to feel bad for the guys at the Post. You got to feel bad for the guys at the Post who on the same day are waiting for the axe to fall and who all is going to get fired. And then they look at the next item and it's that Amazon, I think, am I imagining a number too large? $40 billion that Amazon was going to put into AI ventures. They were going to invest in, I don't know whether it was Anthropic or which firm. And so you're there cleaning out your drawer in the sports department. And they're like, oh, but we do have $40 billion so people can make AI generated memes. Okay.
Right. Although, in Bezos's defense, and I don't know the guy, but I mean, I guess I would say this as devil's advocate, ultimately you gotta, to be able to put out good journalism, which is really the point of all of this, you have to have a good business model. You have to make a little bit of money. You can't just constantly lose a lot of money year after year after year. Even if I guess you can if you truly have bought it as a vanity project and you have endless pockets, and that sometimes happens. But generally speaking, you need to have a business model that makes a little bit of money.
There was a time. So one of the things that we've lost if you're letting me talk about media criticism, one of the things that we lost was magazines. So magazines used to be really important in American discourse. Time Magazine, Newsweek, but then specialty narrowcast, right? The New Yorker, National Review, The Atlantic. The Atlantic is the closest thing that's left of a magazine. But the weight of these things that was limited. Here it is, stapled together. It comes to your house. This thing is important.
Oh, it was like when Time came out in, back when I was a kid, it was like a thing, Time or Newsweek even. Now it's like, seriously?
And a lot of those magazines had benefactors, right? A lot of those magazines were people. If you look at American political history, you go back through Harding, I believe, McKinley, you go back through all these newspaper publishers. You say, why are all these newspaper publishers becoming president? Why are they all becoming senators? You look through the biographies of these people, and from the 1840s to the 1940s, what's with all the newspaper publishers?
Yeah,
because that was the juice, baby. That was where the action. It wasn't because it was a good business
in newspapers.
It wasn't because it was a good business. It was because that's where the juice was. Jeff Bezos, I assume, bought the Washington Post because he thought that's where the juice was. And then he got there and said, oh, wait, I have in a fractured and dying industry, I have affixed this boat anchor to myself. And I want, when Jeff Bezos said it needs to make money, I thought, oh, you didn't know what you bought. What you bought was a way to be influential. And I will shut up by saying, in Citizen Kane, the scene. Charles Foster Kane is out at the newspaper he's publishing in Colorado, and his trustee, an angry trustee, shows up to berate him for his spendthrift policies, and he says, do you know that you lost $1 million last year? And he says, I know I lost $1 million last year, and I expect I will lose $1 million this year, and I expect that I will lose $1 million the year after that and the year after that. And I expect that if I keep going on like this, I'll only be able to publish this paper for the next 135 years. And the tragedy of the Washington Post is that Jeff Bezos only belatedly came around to say, I want this paper to be what I want it to be, which is the Post lunatics who see the Washington Post as basically, the College of Cardinals, this thing. It was a scrappy upstart paper, got super famous because of Watergate. Whatever, things change over time. Jeff Bezos should have, from the beginning, said, this is the editorial position I want this newspaper to have. This is the kind of reporting that I want this newspaper to have, because I bought it, I'm funding it, and it's mine. And if you don't like it, you can go pound sand. Because what is the point of having blank you money if you never say blank you? I do not understand. I do not understand. I would be a terrible rich person, obviously. This is why the good Lord has not seen fit for me to be a rich person. Because if I was a rich person, I wouldn't ever say like, oh boy, we're getting some negative notice on the social media about your suck it. Like, I'm out. That's good.
Right.
Yeah.
That's basically what Barry Weiss, by the way, said to CBS employees this week. But Chris, I think we have Scott Collins. I don't know if we are able to see Scott Collins, but Scott has an intriguing question. Hi, Scott. Thanks for joining us. What's your question today? Where are you located at?
I'm dialing in from Boston, under about 2 feet of snow here. That's not melting at all. So,
yeah, but you know how to handle snow there. DC does not.
Better than DC, yeah, that's for sure.
Weak.
Yeah, I had a couple questions, but the one you mentioned I was really interested in. I wanted to tap into your knowledge of history, because I've observed over the last decade the growing MAGA movement's facility at tearing down institutions, undermining institutions, casting doubt on every kind, the Fourth Estate, the judiciary, Congress, you name it. Is there a historical parallel to this? And have we, been through a period of tearing down and then rebuilding the reputation and efficacy of institutions? And I wonder if, particularly if it ties into your scholarship on populist movements, if there's a seesaw there between institutions and populism.
Scott, will you tell me what your pennant over your window says?
That is my son's a student at Bowdoin College, and that is a Bowdoin pennant.
He's an actual scholar. He's a serious young man.
And an athlete, he's a big football player. So we get up there a lot to watch his games.
Nice. Okay, cool. The historical comparisons on this kind of populism are hard to make because of the maturity of our republic, the age of our republic. So you could say that the Jacksonians and many of the current crop of nationalists see themselves like the Jacksonians. We were still making it up as we went along during the Jacksonian Revolution, right? The norms of even how we elected the president, the norms of stopping the Bank of the United States is different from trying to uproot a Federal Reserve that has been around for 117 years. So you can look around the world and see other places where you have, I think of the United States as like an adolescent country. We're not old because, 250 years is a long time, especially for a democracy, but 250 years I'm sure you know the phenomenon of when you go to Europe and you're walking someplace and you're like, oh, this seems pretty old. And they're like, yeah, it was built 300 years before Jamestown. You're like, oh, right. Never mind. This building's still in use, and it was built before Shakespeare. We are relatively young, but we now have. This is one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is I have a great interview coming up with Lindsay Scherfinsky, who is the head of the George Washington Presidential Library. And she has a great book about John Adams out. And she really got me thinking about the written and unwritten Constitution, and that the United States has both. I sneer at British people for many reasons. Beans for breakfast, gross. But I sneer at the British lack of a written constitution. And they say that their unwritten constitution is superior to our written constitution. But the truth is that we have both. And when you look at Washington and you look at Adams and you look at the first run of presidents up to and including Jackson, they were writing an unwritten constitution about how things are supposed to be, that rooted in the British common law, rooted in the experience of rebellion and independence and all of these things about how they want it to be. We now have a politics, and this is particularly true of the nationalists on the right, but it's also very much true of the progressives on the left, which is not asking should questions, only asking can questions. Can I get away with it? Will the restraints hold me? And if, here's how I'll shut up, because I want to not filibuster this until everyone is old and gray. But I will just say the idea of do you remember when Hillary Clinton and the emails, and they came out after and said, since she's not being prosecuted, she's been exonerated. I'm like, well, I don't think that's the threshold in a functional republic, guys. I don't think that the threshold is, if you cannot convict me of a felony, then I have been absolved of wrongdoing. And to me, that points to the problem and in both parties, but particularly now on the nationalist right, which is we are supposed to be a nation of laws and not men, but laws are not sufficient to constrain amoral and rapacious people. And without dignity, civic decency, and a coherent society that honors that unwritten constitution, laws are insufficient to fetter the hands of rapacious human nature.
Scott, thank you so much for that question. We hope you join us again next week. Let's move to a question now from David Hill. David, welcome to Whole Hog Politics. Where are you calling in from?
Watching from an ice-covered Lexington, Kentucky.
Ooh, nice.
Nice.
Yeah,
nice.
we don't know how to deal with this.
Worse than Washington, huh?
My question is, you mentioned flooding the zone as an effective comm strategy and an awful governing strategy. In the era of flooding the zone constantly, how early is too early, or how late is too late for events to have a real impact on a midterm?
Oh, okay. So,
because we're not going to be talking about 80% of this that we're consumed with today, 8 and 9 months from now, right, Chris, or no?
No, I mean, well, some of it we will, and who knows? There's maybe think about it this way. There's in an election, in a campaign, there's the social psychological part. These are ads. This is rhetoric. This is the vibe. This is all of that other stuff. And then there's the fundamentals. So, and the fundamentals for the Republicans, they have until maybe September, but probably not. They have until the end of the summer, basically, before people's attitudes about the economy set. And if Americans believe, if the preponderance of Americans, and there is a lot of research to support this in presidential years, and I just have to assume it's true in midterm years as well. I don't know that, but the presidential year research is very convincing to me that public opinion sets in the summer about what the economy is like, and the economy is the number one issue. And the Republicans right now are doing what Democrats said before, and they say, hey, you don't feel good about the economy, but actually the economy is really good. If that actually catches up come July and people say, Jerome Powell's right, the economy is actually pretty good and the rate of inflation is down, and as you can see by the surging trade deficit that the United States experienced, the tariffs haven't worked, and that's good for the economy. Basically, imports are up, and that points to some good things. If Americans say in July, yeah, it's okay, then that helps soften the blow for Republicans. But I think your question is really good, because you point to the social psychological problem of, at a certain point, voters say, I'm out. It doesn't matter who the other people nominate. I'm going to not vote for you. And for Republicans, when you look at that 45% of the electorate who are independents, and you look at the 5-point shift already in the Gallup numbers toward Democrats from Republicans, once there is a point where it just is cooked, and it doesn't matter what you say after that. So for I think one of the reasons Republicans are getting so squirrely is that they're aware of the thing that you allude to, which is that the time runs out sooner than you think.
Thank you so much, David. We now have a question from Keith Clark. Keith, thanks for calling in. Where are you located at?
North Carolina.
Oh, you're about to get hit with some snow.
Yes, some snow, and we're getting ready to be hit by Roy Cooper.
What's on your mind today, Keith? What's your question?
Given the dissatisfaction of independents, what is the likelihood that the Democrats can take the Senate?
I started out at a 80-20 that Democrats would win the House, and 80-20 that Republicans would keep the Senate, just based on the difficulties of the map and all those other things. It's not 50-50 on the Senate yet, but it's maybe down to 60-40. The Republicans have too much fat in the fire. The way I think about it is there's a dozen races that are at least nominally competitive, right? That you could say there's a dozen states that include reaches for both parties that are potentially in play. You have a retiring member, you have whatever. Out of the dozen, basically the way my reductive brain works is, if Democrats win 8, then they get the Senate. and they'd have a net pickup of 4, so that you could lose one in Georgia if you compensated for it in someplace else. I looked at the newest numbers. That it's a Emerson College poll out of Michigan, and I had looked at Michigan for a long time as a huge opportunity for Republicans to offset a loss in North Carolina and other potential defeats. And because they have a solid candidate who has run statewide before, who has high name identification in Mike Rogers, and the Democratic primary is a kablooey situation, right? It is rapidly devolving into a hard left progressive versus a squishy moderate, and it's getting ugly. I looked at the most recent numbers, and then I checked some others. He's losing to both of them now, and that should be alarming for Republicans nationally, because if Mike Rogers, who, you know, in key places in Michigan, I know you're talking about North Carolina, and I'm willing to put North Carolina back in the mix as a competitive state, but right now, given the national political climate and Cooper's high favorables in the state, the Republican, I mean, it'll be real expensive for Republicans, but I don't expect. He's the former chairman of the Republican National Committee. Why am I drawing a blank on his name? I've interviewed him.
There's so many. Which one?
No, the likely Republican Senate nominee in Florida, whose name is. I'm sorry, Mr. Former Chairman, that I'm blanking on your name right now. Not important for the larger discussion. If Republicans are going to lose one in North Carolina, they need to win in Georgia. So I look at Georgia and I say, oh, Ossoff is, and this cuckoo banana stuff in Fulton County about sending Tulsi Gabbard out with the FBI and doing all these things. If you're John Ossoff, you're like, sweet Lord, thank you. The number one issue that John Ossoff would like to talk about in the 2026 Senate election would be whether the 2020 Senate election was stolen in Georgia. What Republicans in Georgia, what Brian Kemp and others want to talk about is what they want to have. They've got the guy was a football coach, and he's got a great football coach kind of name, and I can't remember his name right now. I'm blanking on everything. But Brian Kemp's got a guy that can beat him, right? If he gets through the Republican primary in Georgia, John Ossoff is eminently beatable. He's playing out of position because Georgia is still a Republican state, and Ossoff is beatable. And if they have the right candidate, they can get through. But the Republicans threw it away in 2021 and gave Joe Biden a Democratic Senate for the first 2 years of his term. Will they do that again in Georgia? The other thing, and I will stop talking, Bill, I promise. The other thing that caught my attention was that out in Texas, I assumed that the preposterous candidacy of
Jasmine Crockett.
I was going to say there's no way anybody can forget Jasmine Crockett's name. That Jasmine Crockett would be the absolute Democratic nominee out there. The initial polling, and again, it's just initial polling, says no, that maybe Tallarico, the state senator or state representative, has a chance. Now, it's still a reach for Democrats, but Republicans don't want to play defense in Texas. They don't want to spend. Texas is expensive. You've got to run all those ads in Houston and Dallas and Austin and San Antonio, and they don't want to do it. So it's all a very long way of saying the Republicans still have the upper hand in keeping the Senate because of where the races are, but it is getting closer than John Thune would like. And the test for Republicans now in the next 2 or 3 months is they got to get through this primary calendar without screwing it up. They can afford no mistakes. The Republicans now have to play like they're behind, and they have to say, in each one of these races, we have to choose the most electable candidate, and we can't put any Herschel Walkers and Mehmet Oz's in the mix. We got to stay with the football analogy, get back to blocking and tackling, go with what you know works.
Keith, thank you so much for that question. Chris, we're just about out of time. I wanted to just note, of course, and you mentioned this, You are host of Fox. Or you're a host of the. We both worked there for 12 years, right?
Yeah.
The Hill Sunday, the wonderful Sunday chat show. Anything coming up this week, Chris, that you're excited about?
Well, I got to check. I'm checking right now with intrepid producer Anna Sugg to see if we have any updates. I know that we've got Julie Johnson, who is in a difficult district, House Democrat from Texas, who's in a difficult district. And we've got Jeff Duncan. Do you remember Jeff Duncan, who was the lieutenant governor of Georgia? He switched parties. He's now running as a Democrat for governor down in Georgia. And I wanted to talk to him because, like, Georgia's getting very, very, very interesting. And it's your fault, right? It's your fault that Jeff Duncan has to do my show on Sunday, because I got interested in what you were talking about with the shift of electoral votes and how Georgia's going to be. And is Georgia
what I'm here for?
Is Georgia the Wisconsin of the future?
Okay. Folks, that is all the time we have for this edition of Whole Hog Politics. I have to say that the viewer questions really served to class up the joint, really took it up several notches from our normal banter. So we appreciate that. We hope folks will dial in next week and with lots of additional great questions. Until then, I'm Bill Sammon, joined by my old pal Chris Stirewalt. We will see you next time on Whole Hog Politics.